Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you to the walk-around video of one of the latest additions to my park jet hangar. This is called the F16XL Garuda, and it's a co-designed airplane by a couple of fine gentlemen named Ian from the UK and Bimo from Indonesia that I have struck up a friendship with through the RC Powers Forum. This plane was built from the Mark III plans. It's now available for download, and I think the plans that you'll probably get, I think maybe they're calling Mark IV. It may not say that on the plans, but so anyway, it's been a couple of iterations, Mark I and Mark II, before this plane. Down below I'm going to put links to where you can go and get the plans if you're interested in this plane, as well as links to the thread on the RC Powers website where you can see sort of the development of the F16XL from the time that Ian and Bimo got together to co-design this plane. One really honorable thing that these Ian and Bimo are doing is Bimo helps out at a school in his area in Indonesia for kids that are less fortunate. So what they've done is they've set it up so that when you download these plans, you donate to download essentially, and that money goes to help those less fortunate kids and their families. Who Bimo has already also got involved in building some foam airplanes, and I think it's just a really super thing that they're doing there. So you know, if you need any extra impetus to get over the hill to decide whether you want to fly this cool plane, you know, the funds are going to a good cause. So essentially what happened was Ian and Bimo approached me before the plans were released to the public and asked me if I'd be interested in building and flying this plane and giving them my feedback on it. So I was very flattered that they would think that much of me to ask for my input. So we determined that I would do a few things to try and help them out with the fleshing out the full database of testing, if you want. So a few things that I did differently that had not been tried out before in Mark I and Mark II was I put a rudder on mine here. Again, you can see this is sort of my rudder size that I chose on the plans. When you download them, they may be a little bit different than that. I also the prop slot is opened up just because I like to have a more rectangular prop slot, and I also needed to for my motor. This is a 2212-6 2700 kV motor with a 6x3 EMP prop. You'll also hear it referred to as the Focal Price 2700 motor, and it's a little bit longer than this way just because it's got a longer shaft, and I just couldn't be bothered cutting it off. Pardon me, then, you know, say your 2826-6 2200 kV motor from Hobby King. So that was necessary, but wasn't something obviously that I was testing. But I was testing it because this motor is a bit peppier than the 2826 2200. We wanted to see how it would do with a bit more speed. And then the other thing that I did was I put KF4 airfoils here. You can hopefully see airfoils top and bottom. I've symmetrically shaped and sanded the leading edge. So those were sort of the three things that that we determined I would test and give them my feedback. So again, I was very humbled and flattered that they were looking for my input. So off we went with the build. Essentially, my build, my wing plate and the vertical stabilizer here, and my internal structure is made of Depron, just because I like the extra bit of strength and stiffness. The fuselage and canopy are made out of Fly Power Value XPS, I think, which I get from RC Foam. It's essentially, I think, a model plane grade B equivalent foam. It sands and shapes much nicer and is cheaper, about half the price of Depron, so I like to use that for fuselages. For the KF airfoils, I've used for a very, very long time. I just use paperless dollar store foam. Ends up being about 4.5 millimeters thick. I find it's just the right thickness for the stability that I'm looking for out of my airfoils, and also it's very inexpensive, much cheaper than Depron. So again, I talked about my motor already. Here's the electronics bay setup that I have. I'm using a Turnigy 40 amp, Turnigy Plush 40 amp speed controller, 2200 3-cell battery. Bimo has made sort of a recessed battery bay that puts the battery actually slightly below the wing plate, so it helps give it better stability in all three axes, and I think that holds through on the performance, which I'll talk about in a little bit more. I'm using a 6-channel receiver. Obviously with my setup you could get away with a 4-channel receiver, and even if you just went Elevons only, to be quite honest with you, you know, for probably 95% of the people, Elevons only is just fine. This plane flies just awesome, Elevons only. I just wanted to try out the rudder again, just to, you know, play around with it, because it is a single fin, single tail plane, as opposed to, you know, a twin tail like the MiG-29, MiG-FA, MiG-35, those types of planes. So anyway, so essentially, again, I'll put a link to Wikipedia. The really cool thing that drew me to the F16XL when they offered it to me is it has, you know, such a unique wing shape. It's called a cranked aero delta, because you can see it's sort of, you know, with this little bit here, it's almost like an arrowhead, I guess, and then cranked because it, you know, it comes back as a delta and then sort of cranks out. Now General Dynamics, their original, again, you can read more details on Wikipedia, but essentially they were looking for the benefits of a delta style wing to have sufficient lift at supersonic speeds, and then the theory was crank the wing out here to help provide better control and stability at subsonic speeds. And the cool thing is as I'm going to talk about here very soon, I think that those handling characteristics continued through onto this model very well, and I really think that they did an excellent job with the scale looks of it. So the other thing, you know, because of this, I've never really flown. I think I've only ever flown one profile style airplane, a Dassault Rafale that I picked up the plans from parkjets.com. So I'd never really flown a delta wing plane before. So that was another thing, you know, I wanted to learn some things about, you know, how KF size and all that sort of stuff affected a delta wing plane. So it was a real, I think, a win-win, but probably more win on my side, really, to be able to build and fly this plane. So I'm sure I'm going to thank them many times, but thanks again to Ian and Bimo for letting me be in on the process there. So so from a standpoint of where would it fit in, depending on where you are in your RC or your park jet career, it's a bit more complex of a build, the fuselage, than you know, than some of the scornful park jets out there, like for example the F-18 version 3 from RC Powers, which is one of the more straightforward scornful planes. So if you're quite new to the hobby, I would say that this would be maybe a third plane. You know, try out a profile, you know, MiG-29 version 1 again from RC Powers. That and the F-18, the plans are both free when you join, which is also free. So you can play around with those and work on your building and flying, and then work your way up to this one from a build standpoint. Now, from a flying standpoint, it's actually very well behaved airplane, and a lot of that starts. Ian and Bimo really did a lot of you know, by the time again I jumped in on Mark III, and they had done really the heavy lifting, if you want, on dialing in the center of gravity. Now I know it's hard to see because it's all painted black, but my center of gravity is essentially right here. Now, on my plans, the center of gravity was actually depicted on the plans as a little dark rectangle, and I'm at the very back of that. But that's just the way that I ended up with my plane balance. So you may be somewhere, further ahead. You might even be further back. Now, of course, I've got extra weight back here. If you didn't use the rudder setup, between the servo, the linkage, the hinge, and it also has a servo. I ended up having to use a servo extension wire so that I could connect my rudder. You could potentially save yourself, 20 grams, half an ounce or more. So your center of gravity will be in a little bit different spot. But they really did their homework, because in that area that Bimo has marked on the plans, I could tell as soon as I launched this thing on its maiden flight, it's a very, very neutrally balanced plane if you balance it on or close to the CG marked on the plans, meaning that, obviously trim is a fact of life, right? Like, I mean, not every plane is built perfectly straight. You get warps in the foam, you get building errors. So trim is going to be always going to be a fact of life. But the plane just feels neutral, neutrally balanced. And what I like to do to check to see that my plane is neutrally balanced is my partner in NAMC, Stefan, taught me this a long time ago, and it really, really is worthwhile trying with a plane to see what your balance looks like. So you do this, what's called an arc test. You take it up basically in like a 30-degree climb, 60 to 70% throttle. Obviously do this nice and high, 100 feet in the air, whatever, obviously where you can see your plane. It's easiest if you actually do it sort of side on to yourself so you can see what's happening with the plane. Take it up, chop the power, centralize the controls, and see what it does. And if it's fairly neutrally balanced, it should just continue across the top in a nice smooth arc, and then eventually, as airspeed bleeds completely off, it'll continue to descend. Now, if you have a situation where you do that and it sort of sits there and starts to sink or does one of these, it's probably tail heavy. If the nose drops quite aggressively, then it's probably nose heavy. And then depending on your skills, I'll admit I'm still a horrible inverted pilot. But again, take it up nice and high, roll it inverted, and see how it works out. I still, when I fly this inverted, I probably still need maybe about 10% sort of forward pressure on the stick to keep it level inverted. But that's within my way of doing things. That's acceptable. So anyway, that's to me what's important to me in planes is if you can get a plane that's neutrally balanced. On the CG, that's like the foundation of a house for me, because then everything else works so much better off of that. Because when the plane is balanced and you've got a situation like this where you've got your weight concentrated close to the center of gravity, relatively close to the center of gravity, the plane just rotates and moves in all three axes so much more efficiently. And I think that because of the design and doing the homework on that center of gravity, that really, really makes this plane so much nicer, more fluid, more smooth to fly. And then couple that with this very ingenious elevon setup. When you look at it, like normally on the F16XL, this would just be, obviously it's going to be a solid part of the fuselage. And what they've done is made that sort of a lever in the thrust vectoring, as a thrust vectoring vane in the prop wash, so it gives you that little bit of extra oomph in the pitch. So I'm going to show you here in a little bit what my throws are. I was really, really impressed. So actually, let me start talking about sort of the speed envelope. I'm very, very impressed with the entire speed envelope that this plane has. I was able to actually fly it, take it down to say about 40% throttle, just sort of a real gentle cruise, not doing anything crazy or aggressive, because that when you're getting that slow, you do something too aggressive and it'll just bleed the airspeed off in no time, and your plane will stall. But at about 40% throttle, even just with elevons, I didn't even bother with any rudder input. I could do nice gentle turns. I didn't feel like I was going to tip stall. I didn't feel like the plane was going to start doing anything violent. I felt like I had good control over the plane right down to about 40% throttle. One of the things that Bimo has on the plan, which I think is a really cool option depending on what you how you like to fly and what you want out of your plane, is you also have the option along the leading edge here of using sort of what they're calling FLEDs, and I hope I'm translating this correctly, forward leading edge droop, which is kind of like a, you know, almost like a fixed flap, fronteron slat, not really a slat, but you know, but it helps with slow speed stability and handling. And if you couple that with a KF2, you'd be able to fly this plane even slower probably and more stable. One of the things that Bimo's been toying around with is that you could take the canopy off here and then drop a pod in with for first-person view, so you'd be able to fly it around a little bit slower. Me personally, I like this setup. I like to try and fly my planes a bit more scale. So if you're looking for that, you know, for more of a scale setup, this with the straight leading edge and KF4s is, in my opinion, is a really good setup for stability in the wind, stability at speed, and you know, just an overall good setup. So anyway, then when you get into, for me with this setup, once I sort of get into that 50 to 75% throttle, you know, when you're just thrashing and dashing about the sky, so to speak, very impressed with the handling with this plane. I'm gonna, like I said, I'm actually gonna show you the throws I have right now, and then everything else hopefully will be in perspective here. So let me just fire up my transmitter. Okay, so here's essentially what I have in the pitch. So measuring it with a ruler right about here, I actually have about an inch one way, so 2 inches total. And that's, you know, you can see these levers obviously travel a lot further than that. I think when you measure it out here, it's about 2 inches. So these really help out in the pitch, you know, to give you that extra dig in, you know, when you really want to hammer it up into the vertical. So really efficient there. And you can see here, really, you know, when I measure it here, it's actually only about 3/8 of an inch one way, so 3/4 of an inch total. And you know, I would have thought that with a delta wing type plane that I'd need a lot more throw in the roll. Here's my rudder. I'm still playing around with my rudder throw. I've done a few, you know, just sort of stall turns and stuff, but I haven't really explored that quite as much as I'd like to. But anyway, that's another good reason to take it out to the field. So let's just unplug this so we don't have any accidents with the prop going around or anything. Okay, so there's basically essentially the throws, and then that allows me to fly very scale. It gives me a little bit extra, maybe about 10% extra in the pitch, you know, so if I'm lollygagging around or losing focus and all of a sudden the ground or a tree or a fence appears out of nowhere, I've got that extra little bit of, you know, I can yank on the stick and it'll really rotate on me very easily. So very efficient, very well designed control surfaces. You know, you can see I like these nice long elevons out here, but they're not really wide. So you know, it really helps the plane get around, you know, in the pitch and in the roll, and then of course in turns, which is what, you know, the one maneuver you're probably doing the most when you're flying around at your field. So very efficient and effective control surfaces there. So yeah, so 50 to 75% throttle. Again, didn't see any bad habits. You know, didn't see anything with the way these control surfaces are shaped. You know, if I yanked on it really hard and went tight up into the vertical or a really tight loop, I didn't have any of these situations where sometimes you'll get the control surfaces will act like you know, almost like a speed brake. And you know, you end up with your plane stalling and doing crazy things on you, but I didn't notice any of those bad habits. And then you know, when you want to get feel the need for speed and really want to hammer on the throttle, super stable, just this delta part of the wing here was designed for speed. It just buries the nose, locks in, and just gets going where you want it to in a real hurry. It holds its energy, tracks beautifully. You go into a turn, 50 to 75% throttle, no problems. I didn't see any problems with any nose drop. Didn't have to really, actually don't remember feeding in any rudder whatsoever in the turns. Maybe in slightly windier conditions you might need to help keep the nose tracking a little bit better. Holds its energy really, really well. Very, very efficient in its movement. It takes very little control surface deflection to get it to start moving, and it stays going where you point it till you point it somewhere else. It doesn't, wander around or any of those kind of bad habits. So I'm very, very impressed with this plane. So again, if you're looking for something really, really unique, like I said, the nose assembly is a little bit more complex than some, but the rest of it actually is a very straightforward, simple setup. And again, you can get away with 3 channels if you want, so you can keep it really light, and then have the ability to add an FPV pod. You've got plenty of wing area. I'm just running a single 4mm carbon rod across here for my wing spar, and in addition to the KF4s, no problem whatsoever. You can yank and bank this thing around at full throttle, no problems with any wing flex. So I'm sure it's it's going to be capable of carrying quite a bit of weight and wing loading if you want to really load it up with other gear and paraphernalia. So I guess that's basically about it for the F16XL Garuda. This paint job, actually, this is kind of a stylized paint scheme from NASA. After General Dynamics was done with their 2 F16XLs that they built, they lost, I think it was the Enhanced Tactical Fighter competition. They lost out to the F-15E Strike Eagle, so I think their impetus with playing around with the F-16 kind of gave out after that. Again, you can read more about that in the Wikipedia link. So the plane was turned over to NASA, and NASA did quite a bit of testing with it. And this is based on the paint scheme from the single seat, but it was mostly all black with a few little yellow stripes here and there. Thanks to Ian for some great advice. He had tried this out on one of his first Mark 1s and said it was really a challenge to keep track of, as you can imagine, mostly black. So for my poor old 54-year-old eyes, I chose sort of the same colors, obviously, and then just enhanced the paint scheme a little bit, took a little bit of artistic license, so I added a bit more yellow onto it for contrast. So I think it looks pretty darn cool, and overall the plane looks really, really great. So thanks again to Bimo and to Ian. Very, very pleased with how this plane flies. Very, very humbled and proud and excited to be part of helping you guys out with it. Again, if you're interested in this really scale-looking, scale-flying plane, check the links below. Like I said, the funds go to a very good cause, helping out some kids and their families in Indonesia that are less fortunate. And I think, I think that's a really honorable thing. There'll also be more links to lots of other information. And again, I encourage you to go check it out. And if you're interested in flying, a really cool looking plane to your hangar, that's just a ton of fun to fly. Please go check out the F16XL Garuda. So thank you very much for watching, and calm winds and blue skies to everyone. Take care.